Hi, this is Joe Bolen, and today we're going to look at lifetime scope and access level of our Visual Basic variables. Back in 1964, when BASIC was first introduced to the public, it was a procedural language, and all variables in the code would be available through all lines of the code. They were global or public. Now today, when we program, VisualBasic.net is an object-oriented programming language, and we want to hide our variables so that they're not available to all lines of code and all assemblies. And the other thing is we want to free up our memory as we use our variables so that we use them, then when we're done with them, we discard them and free up our memory for other parts of our program. So those are the important things we're going to be looking at in this particular lesson. Let's take a look at our concepts of lifetime scope and access level of variables. Well, the main point we want to look at is we want to reduce the potential for naming conflicts. As I said, the danger is with a variable that's public or global that we can end up in a situation where we might accidentally use that variable somewhere else, not aware that we have used it in another place in our program. And so that could be a problem in our code. The other thing is the conservation of memory is one of the areas we want to look at. When we're done using our variable, we want to free it up so that the memory is available for other purposes. Then the other concept is information hiding or encapsulation. We want to keep our variables hidden in what I would call a black box, so that only things within that black box are aware of what's going on and know about other variables related to that black box. And then we allow certain accessors to come in and access that black box to do actions, methods, and functions, but not to be aware of those private hidden variables inside our black box. That's an important concept for object-oriented programming. So let's take a look at this a little bit more in detail. First of all, let's look at the actual term lifetime of a variable. The lifetime of a variable represents the period of time during which it is available for use and can hold a value. That sounds pretty basic and understandable, but let's see how we further understand that. Now, in an actual procedure, in a local variable, it will last only while that procedure is running. So once that procedure is finished, that variable is gone. It's not available anymore, and it would have to be recreated and accessed again in that procedure. But it's gone once we leave that particular procedure. A static local variable, however, begins when we first enter the procedure and reference that variable, but will last until the application actually ends, so it does last much longer. Then we have what are called member or class level variables that last for the lifetime of the instance of that class. So when I instantiate a class, all the variables within it are available. But when that class goes away, all the variables in that class are gone. And that gives us our black box concept. And then we have shared variables which last as long as the application is running. And we'll see that especially in using a module where we might have functions and variables available in that module that are always going to be available to our code. Now let's take a look at the scope of a variable. The scope of a variable is the span of code that can refer to it without qualifying its name or using the import statement. Sometimes you've seen me use the import statement to be able to access easily something within my code without defining it and qualifying it totally. The import statement allows that to be available to me. So we want to look at that. Also, we want to be able to just be able to reference names within our code without special qualification. Now, there are 4 levels of variable scope, and the first level is the block level, and that is the simplest That is where we enter in maybe a do while loop, where we have a variable that's in there, or a for next loop. That variable lasts only while we're in that block. It can also be seen in a procedure. In a procedure, that variable lasts for that procedure and is available within that procedure as we run code within that block of code and procedure. And finally, modules, being either in classes or structures, they also are where we have a level of scope. And then finally, the namespace itself. So many times we might need to pull in a namespace or use the import statement to make some of the other variables that we need available to our program. Now, it depends on where you declare a variable, as well as the access modifier level that is used to control its scope. So we'll take a look at that as we get into our code, and I'll show you an actual example. Both the block and the procedural level variables are local variables in terms of their lifetime and are private to the procedure in which they are declared. So they're only available to us while we're in that particular block of code or procedure, and they go away or cease to exist after we leave that procedure. Now, module level variables are a little bit different. They're available throughout the module and can be made available outside the module via its access modifier. For example, if we give that variable a public access or a friend access to the modifying how we declare that variable, we can make that variable available. And module level variable that is declared using the friend or the public modifier have the greater scope and are available throughout the namespace. So we want to use public when we want it to be available throughout our program, but we don't want to use it all the time because we want to keep things hidden in our code. Now, access level is a little bit different. It determines what code has permission to read or write to the variable on that. And it is good programming practice to choose the narrowest level of scope and access for a variable to reduce the problem of name conflicts and also to conserve memory. Now, we can declare a variable as private, access only within the same class, module, or structure. And if we use the dim keyword at the module level or class level, it's the same thing as declaring it as private. Only that particular module or class can use that variable and is being seen by other parts of the program only if it's within the class itself. Outside the class, it's not available. Protected is another way to declare a variable, and this access is available within the class or an inherited class from it. And then the friend is accessed within the same assembly, and a protected friend is accessed within the class, the inherited class, or the assembly. And then finally we have the public, which basically is global access level permissions. However, it cannot be used inside a procedure. We have to use that at our class or module level. Within a procedure, it is private, and we use normally the dim keyword for that in that level. So let's take a look in our code and see how we actually understand those variables in running. I have on the screen a program that I used in the last video, video 29, subroutines and functions. And I had a class level variable that I declared at the very beginning, and I declared it private, meaning that only this class can see this particular variable. I could have made it global by making it public, but I do not want to have this particular one available everywhere. For example, I may want to use result somewhere else in my code in a totally different way than I have it here. So I want to make this private, and this variable then result is available throughout every function block of code within this particular class of the main form. Now we saw that I used it, and then once I did declare it at the class level, you can see that result here was available as a field, and I made the particular field empty by using the string empty to assign for it. And then I came down and actually called a subroutine, in this case the add two numbers subroutine, and I put the value of that process in that class level variable result to bring it back to my GUI interface into the text property of that particular label. So we had result available throughout the whole area of our code, and then as we come down here in our subroutine, you can see that I had available result either to deal with errors in the data being processed or to return the final value back. But this was a class level variable and not actually a very good way to program this particular routine. But if I had not declared it there, let's say I commented this out with a apostrophe as our commenting character to make that code not readable, you'll see right away that result within the procedure itself has an error message because it hasn't been declared. Now I could declare result here, and we could see result in this particular area of the module worked fine. So I'll use dim result as string. And once I do that, you'll see that I don't have at this point any error message related to using the variable, and it's available here. However, let's take a look down in the code itself of add two numbers. If we come down here, you'll see that I still have a problem. Result field is not available. The scope is not available in this particular instance of this particular area of code because it is a one that has been declared in another module, and therefore I've got a problem in that. And one of the ways I dealt with that was I actually passed in result as a third parameter and passed it by reference into another modified routine. So we see that the problem we have is that I have to declare a field in the right area to be usable. And in this case, the only place I could use this one is at the class level. Once again, this is not a good idea because this particular field was needed only in a routine and not really needed elsewhere, and coding the way I did was not really a good example of code. The better one would have been to code the field in the routine itself and then pass it in by reference into the function. So we want to remember that class level variables are something that we have to use with a little bit of respect on how we declare it. We can also make it public, which means it'll be available to other parts of my program, but I don't want to have everything public. Now there are some programmers that say, well, let's just go to the class level and make every variable public. Well, that's like having a lot of streakers running around naked in your code. We really want to make things sort of modest. We want to have our variables hidden and available inside our little self-contained houses, either in procedures or block level code or in larger blocks of code. But we don't want to have them available all over our program because that's like going back to 1964. We're using object-oriented programming and we want to hide our variables. Also, once a variable is used and is no longer available, we've freed up the memory for that in the computer for other things. So as we look at using variables, we want to take advantage of making things isolated in terms of how we declare them. We want to use public variables when we need them available in other areas of our code, but not every variable should be public. We want to make things more private in classes. We all use the dim keyword within a module or a block of code, and we'll see that those variables are only available during the time they're running in a procedure, and their lifetime ceases to exist after they're done. In the class level, they last as long as the instance of that class is running. And if we declare it in a static level, in maybe a module versus a class, then those variables are available throughout the whole lifetime of the program running. But we want to use them very carefully and not just have everything open and public. And if you do that, you'll have good code, it'll be clean code, professional code that can be modified by other programmers without worrying about some other area of the code being affected because you did not declare it correctly. So use your ways of declaring variables. Either declare it as public when it needs to be public, declare it as private or friend, or just use the dim keyword in a module to keep our code tight and clean. And if you'll do that, you'll have great code. So take care, practice, get your hands dirty in the code. Until next time, take care.